Hey everybody, this is Tony Jones, and on behalf of BeliefNet and my blog called The New Christians at BeliefNet, I'm really happy to interview Bart Ehrman. Bart.
Hello.
You there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, all right. Well, Bart, I just have read your new book, Jesus Interrupted, and you've been, I'm sure, doing massive amounts of media. So for you to deign to talk to a lowly blogger, I'm appreciative. But tell me, I'm a Princeton guy too, and I've a few years behind you in the PhD at Princeton. But it seems like a lot of your kind of what you've written about, especially in your books that have been big sellers recently, emerged from your time at Princeton. And you've written a lot about that, but are there things that as you look back on Princeton that you uncover that you think were particularly significant in kind of changing your view of the Bible?
Yeah, I went to Princeton Seminary really for just one reason. I had gone to Wheaton College and had taken Greek there and enjoyed Greek and was pretty good at it, and wanted to do a PhD eventually dealing with the Greek New Testament. But specifically, I was interested in working in textual criticism, working with the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. And, of course, Bruce Metzger taught at Princeton Theological Seminary. So I applied to Princeton for one purpose only, which was to study with Bruce Metzger. And in part, it was because I thought that this would be a safe way for an evangelical like me to get a solid degree in New Testament studies, was by doing textual criticism, because I wouldn't have to deal with theological issues at a school that disagreed with my theology. And so
did you go in thinking that straight kind of study of the manuscript was less ideologically driven than a study of like systematic theology, for instance?
Absolutely. In fact, the field of textual criticism is peopled with scholars like that who have gone off to do degrees at reputable schools, but worked in text criticism so they didn't have to deal with theology and didn't have to deal with biblical criticism or any. Just we're going to work with manuscripts, which always seems to people to be the safe way to go.
When I was at Princeton, we would kind of joke. I'm in practical theology, so we spend a lot of time talking about hermeneutics, and you have to take a seminar on hermeneutics, and you have to take a comprehensive exam in hermeneutics. And we would always kind of joke about how much we talked about interpretation, and then our dissertations are rife with hermeneutics, but that the people in Old Testament and New Testament were more like mathematicians, that they were talking about how many times can you find the second aorist when it, in its particular permutation or something like that, and I'll write my dissertation on, uses of the second aorist in Luke Acts or something like that.
Well, it is a striking thing that people in biblical studies tend not to take courses in hermeneutics on any level. They take courses in exegesis, which, of course, in some evangelical circles, those are the same thing. But,
right.
But the idea of philosophical hermeneutics simply isn't part of the curriculum for most people working in biblical studies. But in my case, that didn't end up mattering, because I think that if I had taken courses in hermeneutics, my barrier would have been so strong that nothing would have gotten through it. And so what happened to me was that I took courses in biblical studies that were of what you're calling sort of the mathematical sort, but they had the effect of breaking through my assumptions about the Bible that I brought in with me, that the Bible was some kind of infallible guide without any mistakes in it. So the way you break through that isn't by reading Ricoeur. The way you or Derrida or Foucault or whatever. I mean, the way you break through that is by doing hardcore modernist historical criticism.
So do you think you'd come from Moody. It's funny, I asked commenters on my blog if they had any questions for you, and I got a couple that I'll get to in a few minutes. But one of them was a student from Moody who said, Bart, your writings are making a lot more sense to me than what I'm learning at Moody. I'm a second semester senior. How can I possibly finish and graduate from this place?
Wow.
I don't know that you'd have any good advice for that person, but
well, yeah. I mean, my advice is that you graduate and then get on with your life.
Right. I mean, I don't, not to belabor the point, but do you think in biblical studies there's a bit, and this shows my bias as in practical theology, but do you think there's a bit of a naivete about philosophical hermeneutics? Oh,
absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, the way biblical studies is typically taught is completely based on 19th century assumptions about text and meaning. So there is this kind of assumption that texts will yield their meaning to you if you simply approach them in the proper exegetical fashion. And so it's all about finding the meaning in the text. And so modern theory, critical theory, literary theory, has left a lot of biblical studies completely untouched. So the deal is, though, I don't get into that kind of thing so much in my books because
right.
of the audience that I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with an audience that believes in objectivity and that believes that texts yield their meaning. And my goal is to help people see that view is problematic, but the way to get to those people, again, isn't by trying to get them to read Foucault, because they're not going to understand Foucault, or if they do understand it, they're not going to appreciate Foucault. What they're going to appreciate is when you point out, in fact, taking their own assumptions, this text is problematic, based on their own assumptions about the text.
It's interesting. I think probably some people who are listening to this will bristle when they hear you say that your quest in writing is to help people, quote unquote, because they're going to see you as some nefarious figure who's trying to destroy the authority of the sacred text.
Right. Well, that's not true at all, actually. I mean, it's true that I'm trying to get people to see that the Bible cannot be an inerrant revelation from God. It can't be. There are too many discrepancies and contradictions and different perspectives. There are books in the New Testament that claim to be written by people who didn't write them, and so there are all these problems. But this shouldn't destroy somebody's faith. The last chapter of my book is called of Jesus Interrupted is called "Is Faith Possible?" And I answer very strongly, yes, it's possible, but certain kinds of faith simply aren't tenable in my view. And leaving behind that kind of faith that's not tenable is a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, you think that a lot of people, and I agree with you, and I think it's a very unhappy situation in American Christianity. And I think it's really an unhappy situation in Christianity in the global South, which is, increasingly conservative and literalistic. But aren't you appealing in your book to kind of this logical positivist kind of paradigm that kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like what is?
Yes. No, I know exactly what you're saying, and what I'm trying to do is, I guess I'm fighting fire with fire, because of the way that I myself came to realize that the Bible cannot be some kind of objective revelation from God that is inerrant. The way I came to that realization was not by reading philosophical hermeneutics. The way I came to that realization was by having a certain set of assumptions about objectivity and truth and the law of non-contradiction and so forth, and seeing that, in fact, the Bible does have problems. On those very assumptions, the Bible has problems, which forced me to a different philosophical perspective. But I couldn't have gotten to that philosophical perspective through reading the philosophers or the theorists.
Okay.
If that makes sense, if you see what I'm saying.
It does. It does. And I just wonder, so in your books, you don't really, I guess then you don't really show your cards on your chosen hermeneutical position at this point, because you're still arguing to people who are objectivists. So you're saying you're trying to speak the language of objectivists to objectivists to kind of deconstruct how they understand the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying actually to reach people, and you have to reach people where they are. You can't reach them by hoping that they'll be where you are. And so I think you have to go to where people are, and this is where people are.
For sure.
I think there's a long tradition of this within Christianity. I mean, I've done a lot of work on the Church Father Origen, who has precisely this idea that you reach people where they are, and you bring them along, but you can't expect them to take gigantic leaps. And so Origen had this very sophisticated spiritual hermeneutic when he approached texts, but he started out with a literal interpretation of a text to get him there. And
right.
So I kind of see it that way, that it's a pedagogical project that requires you starting out where people are.
And what do you think is the danger? I mean, you're trying to help people, and sometimes gently, sometimes not so gently, deconstruct their kind of objectivist, literalist readings of texts, and to help them toward what end? I mean, do you see? Obviously, I personally agree that it's better if people have a less naive reading of the Bible or of any text, but particularly of the Bible. But what's the danger of the objectivist reading? What's the danger in what you learned when you were at Moody or Wheaton for the average, church-going, objectivist, Bible-believing Christian?
I think the danger is assuming that you have a kind of inerrant revelation from God that can be used in order to determine how life is to be lived and how the church is to be run. And, I mean, the problem with it is that it leads to all sorts of acts of injustice and oppression. I mean, just sort of the most obvious cases today are the way the Bible, being accepted as an objective revelation from God, requires that women not participate actively in churches and that gays not have civil rights. I think this is terrifically harmful, and it's all rooted in a false idea of what the Bible really is.
I mean, when I went to Fuller, it's interesting. I had a different experience than when you were at Moody or Wheaton, and so I guess probably Princeton was less shocking for me, because Fuller, it seemed to me, cut kind of a middle path. So I remember, I remember Richard Mao at the time was the provost, and I took a class with him, and we talked about the Fuller Statement of Faith, and I'd love to hear your reaction to this, because, of course, Fuller got in a lot of trouble in the 70s for hiring David Hubbard and declaring that they weren't going to have the word inerrancy in their Statement of Faith, but instead use this word infallibility of the text, of the Bible text. And so half the faculty left and moved to Chicago and, joined the faculty at Trinity, because that was an inerrantist seminary. Yeah. And when I asked Mao, what's the difference between inerrancy and infallibility, he said, inerrancy is about the kind of, and I'd like to hear you, because you use that word in your books, particularly in this most recent book. Inerrancy is about, is the Bible have any errors, even in, scientific or historical data? And when I write about stuff like that on my blog, conservatives get really up in arms, and they say I'm misunderstanding inerrancy, and that's not what inerrancy means at all. And then infallibility he described to me as, basically he kind of described it in the negative, and that is, when the Bible is read faithfully and in its historical context, it will not lead someone into sin. It won't lead you to do morally reprehensible things. But, there's a lot of, that's a